Well, I've always wondered, how the day began for Bartimaeus. My guess is he had another terrible night's sleep, sleeping on the street corner somewhere. He gets up, shakes the dust and the dirt and the straw off of his cloak, his only possession, and slowly began to make his way to the city gates of Jericho. Back in those days, he didn't have a walking cane like they had today, so I picture him just kind of feeling his way along the streets and the path, a walk that he's probably done countless times before, over and over again. I don't know, maybe he was able to get a cup of tea along the path, or maybe a piece of bread. And he finally gets to the city gates of Jericho, and he takes his place among the other beggars. There were several probably at that time, and the day just began like any other day, and he began to call out for alms, to call out for help, support, for anyone who walked by. Please, give me something, give me anything. But suddenly, as the city became alive and as people began to crowd in and out of the city, I just got to imagine he felt something different about that day, what's going on? There's this large crowd of people that were walking towards him, and suddenly he found out it was Jesus of Nazareth who was in town. He was going to walk right by him, and I think that blind Bartimaeus had heard about his teaching, had heard about the miracles of Jesus, and the spark of faith had been ignited in him. And so there he was, waiting for Jesus to walk right past him.
Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.
How did that make you feel? Thank you, Steve. A little awkward, right? A little bit like, uh-oh, right? Like a little, some of you probably went, uh-oh, it's going to happen. I've been waiting for this day. But I asked Steve to shout out that phrase because I wanted you just to feel what some of the crowd felt like, right? See, in their minds, blind Bartimaeus was just another poor beggar on the street, and here was the famous Jesus, the rabbi of Nazareth, who had no time for insignificant beggars, especially a guy named Bartimaeus. And so this is exactly why the crowd and the disciples said, hey, pipe down, be quiet. He has no time for you. And that's probably what some of you thought. Like, hey, wow, that guy, someone, ushers, escort him out, right? The great Pastor Rob Hall is preaching right now. No. Oh. I know. But what I love about this story was that while Bartimaeus was physically blind, he saw what so many others did not. Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. The title Son of David was really synonymous with Messiah. And ever since the great King David, the Jewish people were waiting for a son of David, God's promise to send a deliverer, a Messiah, to rescue them from hundreds of years of oppression. And so being identified as the Son of David, Jesus was being recognized, at least by one person, as the fulfillment of all the messianic prophecies and the long-awaited king who would come and deliver his people out of bondage. And actually, the only other person to make this connection, just if I remember right, a few chapters earlier, was Peter. And now, Bartimaeus, an unknown man, the son of Timaeus, was connecting the dots, and he takes a huge risk, a risk of faith, and he cries out, have mercy on me. Some of your translations may say, take pity on me. Man, he was just so excited, maybe so desperate for good news. He believed that someone, just Jesus, could do what no one else could do. Have mercy on him, heal him, give him his sight. And I get the idea that he must have created quite a scene because, he said, Son of David, have mercy. But they say, shh, be quiet. And he just said, that just emboldened him even more. Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, I love it. And it's right here, at this incredible moment, we get a glimpse into the heart of God. Jesus stopped and called him. Even though Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem, where he knows he's going to be arrested, put on trial, beaten, and murdered on a cross, he hadn't lost any sympathy with the needs of one single, insignificant, blind beggar. And I'm just here to tell you, in case you forgot, there is no one unworthy of the mercy of Jesus. That he always has time to stop and call you to his side. No matter what you are going through, Jesus always has time to stop, to listen. And maybe, you've been so discouraged, you've just stopped asking Jesus for help. I've been there. Or maybe you've just been so disillusioned by Jesus or the church or Christians, and you've actually told other people to stop calling out to Jesus. Or maybe you just think Jesus is just too busy for you. Like he has way more important things to do, like, ending world hunger. Like he doesn't have time for you. No. One of the powerful points of this story is that Jesus is never too busy for you. Don't stop calling out to him. Don't listen to others who tell you to be quiet either. Don't ever be shushed by someone else. See, Jesus is always willing. He's always calling. He's always ready for you to cry out to him in faith. But then Jesus asks a very penetrating question, a question that was so obvious to anyone around there. What do you want me to do for you? What do you want? And that's a great question for you to consider for yourself this morning. What do you want Jesus to do for you? And I love it. Bartimaeus, man, he throws his cloak aside, probably his only possession, meaning that he was there just in his undergarments. They were Calvin Klein, so he was good. And he jumps to his feet. I picture him just stumbling over to Jesus. Maybe someone helped him to get over there. And he's there basically almost naked. He doesn't care. He is not going to miss this opportunity to come to Jesus. And with incredible tenderness, with compassion, Jesus asks Bartimaeus this question: what do you want me to do for you? And again, it was pretty obvious, right? To everyone watching, Jesus, dude wants to see. Like, do you not see that? But once again, if you've been paying attention, the Gospel of Mark, he's revealing to us how Jesus was always looking deeper, looking into our heart, wanting to grow people's faith. Mark was also contrasting Bartimaeus' response to James and John, who just earlier asked, when Jesus asked them, what do you want me to do for you? They said, oh man, we want to sit in power and glory at your right hand and your left. See, James and John want glory, but they were spiritually blind, but Bartimaeus had eyes of faith. So he asks for mercy, but now Jesus is almost like he says, be more specific. Do you only want to physically see? Do you want some food? Do you want some money? Or do you want more? And the question just lingers out there. And Jesus wants him to consider this question for himself, to build his faith, to strengthen his faith. What was his greatest need? And think about it. How hard, how vulnerable would it be for this man who probably had been blind since the day he was born to be surrounded by people and to vocalize to everyone what he really wanted? He knows he's blind. Everyone else knew he was blind. Oh man, but now his faith was going public. And yet again, Jesus was revealing to us that he's not just another miracle worker. He came to bring us into a relationship with him, one that includes discipleship and following him on the road. See, Jesus wanted Bartimaeus not only to see physically, but to see spiritually who Jesus is and what he came to do. And so Bartimaeus said, Rabbi, or teacher. Some translations say master. Master, I want to see. But not only do I want to see and follow you on the road all the way to Jerusalem, all the way to the cross. And Jesus said, go, your faith has healed you. And we've said this many, many times as we've journeyed through Mark. It wasn't the measure of his faith that healed him. Jesus has already told us all you need is faith as small as a mustard seed. No, it was the object of his faith. Jesus healed him because even with the tiny bit of faith, man, he can and loves to do the impossible. So he heals this man, and this man follows him on the road, Mark tells us. Augustine of Hippo put it this way: the blind man believed in Jesus before he could see him, and then he saw him with the eyes of faith before he could see him with the eyes of his body. Isn't that good? But what I love about this story, it's not just another story about healing. By the way, this is the last healing in the book of Mark, believe it or not. This is not a story about, hey, you get healed and you go home happy to live your best life now and to go on to the Today Show and talk about how Jesus healed you and write a best-selling book. No. This is a story about what it means to follow Jesus. See, the recovery of sight wasn't just a physical miracle, although it was symbolic of discipleship. It meant, yes, Jesus, I want to see you and follow you, Lord. And so, yes, Bartimaeus was healed, but Mark told us that he followed Jesus along the road and into Jerusalem. I think that's really significant because true faith always results in a life that follows Jesus all the way to the cross. Remember what Mark told us earlier: whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me, whether you're healed or whether you're not. And again, this was another lesson for the disciples. See, the disciples, and Mark is pointing this out, continue to be blinded to the true mission of Jesus, right? They wanted a conquering king who would overthrow Roman rule, so they could sit on his right and his left and have power. And that's why just the passage before, Jesus reminded them, no. The way up is down. You want to get to the top? You serve people, even blind beggars. Right? Because Jesus' focus was on another kingdom, a different kingdom, God's kingdom. One in which Satan and sin and death will be destroyed through his death and resurrection. A kingdom of love and servanthood and sacrifice and healing. And so Jesus, not only healed the blind man, but he was healing the spiritual blindness of the disciples as well. They could not see. Oh, they're going to see soon. And all throughout Mark, we've learned that Jesus was much more than a prophet. He's much more than a teacher. He's much more than a healer. Jesus is the Son of David, the Messiah, God's one and only Son, God in the flesh. And next week, we'll look at him entering Jerusalem, and there's going to be a big contrast between Bartimaeus, who sees spiritually and physically, and all the religious leaders who are still blind, so blind they crucify the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. So what does this mean for us today? Like, what does it mean? Well, one thought came to me is like, wow, like being a disciple of Jesus is allowing for divine interruptions, even from people who are beneath you. Are you good at that? No, you're terrible at that. I'm terrible at that. And what's been so surprising to me is as we've gone through Mark is Jesus, man, he never seemed to be in a rush, did he? He always made time for people, for kids, for the crippled, for the lame. Jesus was never interested in building his platform. Jesus did for Bartimaeus what he could do. He gave him sight in response to his faith. And the question that I've been thinking about this week, do we allow for divine interruptions in our schedules? I know what the problem is, because I have the same problem. The problem is we're so busy, we have very little margin in our schedules or in our budgets to help people. But can I say, you just never know how God wants to use you in little ways and in big ways to love and serve people, even insignificant people. So I just want to encourage us, let's be available to people. Let's slow down. Let's be better listeners. Hey, don't be afraid to say, hey, can I pray for you about that? But much more than that, Bartimaeus is a story I think about the power of compassion in Jesus' name. How do I get there? Well, actually, this story is also in the Gospels of Matthew and Luke. They write about this same story in their gospel accounts, but it's really interesting. In Matthew's account, in his retelling, he remembered that there were 2 blind men, not one. Now, by the way, I don't think this is a contradiction, like, oh my gosh, see, that's why I don't believe the Bible. Mark says 1 and Matthew said 2. No. They just saw from different perspectives. There's different reasons. Matthew wants to focus on how Jesus felt. Mark is focusing on what this man said, right? Listen to what Matthew said. He wrote, Jesus had compassion on them and touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and followed him. It's interesting. We've seen this a few times in Mark, definitely in Matthew, the compassion of Jesus, the compassion that led him to touch people. See, in Jewish thinking, compassion is always associated with our guts, with our insides. It's something we feel. It's a great Greek word, splachna, right? It's like, blah, blah. That's what it feels like. Like when you have compassion, like your guts are moved a little bit. And it's kind of a mix of sympathy and outrage. Like sympathy is to feel or to suffer with someone. Jesus felt deeply for people, and that motivated him to act. But compassion is much more than sympathy. It has this component of what I would call righteous anger towards circumstances that are unjust, unfair, or just disheartening. Do you ever read the news or watch the news and you see an injustice or something happen and just something wells up in you and you think, man, why is our world that way? That's compassion. That's righteous anger welling up. And so Jesus healed people to point them to what life is like in the kingdom of God. He touched a leper and said, be clean, because disease was not the way it was supposed to be. He raises Lazarus from the grave because death was not the way it was supposed to be. He gave sight to the blind because he created us to see. And so as we look around our world and we see pain and injustice and suffering and poverty and hunger and brokenness and evil, as followers of Jesus, Jesus wants us to feel something about those things and then do something about those things. And that's what Jesus does in this story. See, the real power of this story for us is when the compassion of Jesus in us intersects with the brokenness in people's lives. Many of us, most of us, will probably never heal someone who is blind, although I hope you do. Please email me when you do that. That'd be amazing. But God calls all of us to feel deeply about the brokenness we see and experience in our world, and then, yes, do something about it. And so acts of compassion are one of the many ways we can help cure people of their spiritual blindness. See, Jesus wants to heal people in the Bay Area too, and he's asked you to help. Here's what I've realized over all these years. I've realized, and I've seen this happen, the pain that you've experienced in your life can often become your motivation and your invitation to love and serve other people. Did you notice that? So let me give you a few quick examples. I mean, maybe you've survived cancer. And you then, what would it look like for you to come alongside someone who's just received the diagnosis and walk with them through it? That's the power of the church. Or maybe having gone through the pain of divorce, after you've done your own healing, you can now be there for someone who's experiencing the same thing. That is the power of the church. So think about your own life. Where do you find sympathy for others? Where are you angry about the forces that destroy people's lives? Those might be a place of ministry for you. Well, what about like the big, huge problems of our world? Pastor Rob, are you saying like we can actually do something about that? Yes, I am. Rich Stearns, the former president of World Vision, in his incredibly challenging book I read years ago, The Hole in Our Gospel, he actually pointed out how the American church is the wealthiest community of Christians in the history of the world. Listen to this. You're about to get convicted. It's not me, it's the Holy Spirit. I'm telling you, I read this again, I was like, the total income of American churchgoers in a 2003 study, so are we a little more rich now? Yes, we are, was about $5.2 trillion. That's $5,000 billion, and that's a statistic 20 years ago. Sadly, the average Christian gives only 2.5% of their income to the church or to Christian organizations, and only 2% of that amount ever leaves the country to assist in what God is doing around the world. Stern calls this the 2% of the 2%. He then argues that if Christians would be more generous and give, say, 10% of their income, there would be an extra $168 billion to spend on the funding of the work of Jesus Christ around the world. And with that money, he writes, we could eliminate the most extreme poverty on the planet for over 1 billion people. With $6 billion, we could educate all the children of the world. With $9 billion, we could bring clean water to almost every single poor person in the world who doesn't have it. And with $13 billion, we could offer basic health and nutrition to every single person in the world. Wow. And that's just money. What about prayer and getting more serious about prayer? What about evangelism and really being a witness in our workplaces or in our communities? Or what about working much harder to love and serve the least of these? See, the danger, or maybe the temptation, is you read a story like Bartimaeus and think, wow, that's great. Good for you, Jesus. I'm not Jesus. Good for him. But that's a great story. It makes me feel so good about being a Christian. No, you have a part to play in God's kingdom too. See, God created you and wants your life to have an impact on others. You are now the hands and feet of Jesus, empowered to follow him and to live like him. You may be the only Christian your neighbors or your family, your coworkers have ever met. And through his power and his grace, we can show the compassion and love of Jesus by coming alongside human brokenness in all its forms and coming alongside people who are spiritually blinded and sharing your faith and inviting them to follow Jesus along with you. That's the power of this story. This is not just a feel-good story. Way to go, Jesus. Another healing. Let's go on with our lives. Jesus is saying, what do you want me to do for you? Or I'll put it this way, what is one thing you'll do on Monday? I'll give you some quick examples. You can sign up and serve at Bel Air Elementary with Mobilize Love. You can serve at our church. We always have needs. You could serve outside of our church. You can be brave this week and prayerfully finally talk to your friend about Jesus. Or you can do whatever the Holy Spirit is nudging you to do. So here's what we're going to do. It's Communion Sunday, so I'm going to ask the band up and the ushers to start passing out the elements. This is, like I've said, the last healing in the book of Mark, but Jesus continues to heal people today. Jesus' death and resurrection made it possible for the forgiveness of sins and the restoration of our relationship with God. And I believe this restoration includes spiritual, emotional, relational, and yes, even physical healing. Jesus' death provides not only salvation, but also the very real possibility of healing for those who have faith in him. And it's so interesting that all throughout our study of Mark, we've seen Jesus heal people with all kinds of different diseases and ailments. And these healings were the evidence of Jesus' power and his compassion and his victory over sin and death. But he is not done. Hundreds of years before the life of Jesus, the prophet Isaiah penned these beautiful words from Isaiah 53. Surely he took our pain and bore our suffering, yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him. And listen to this, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own ways, and the Lord has laid on him, that's Jesus, the iniquity of us all. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to, in a moment, stand and we're going to sing the great hymn of the faith, Jesus Paid It All. And we're going to prepare our hearts to receive the Eucharist. And after this song, I'm going to come back up. We'll take the elements together. And then we're going to sing another song. And we're going to invite anyone to the front who wants specifically to be prayed for healing, whether that's physical or emotional or even spiritual. Or I was even thinking this morning, maybe you need to come up and pray for someone in your life who you want God to heal. And our prayer team will be up here in a moment. But let's all stand as the elements are being passed. Make sure you grab the bread. Make sure you grab the juice. Just hold it. Let's sing this song together, and I'm going to come right back up, and we'll take it together.